Krishna 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 Hare Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna. Today is usually reserved for a reading from the Srimad Bhagavatam, but since there's no facility for doing that now, we're just going to skip it today. I want to say how honored I am to have been invited to this wonderful Hare Krishna Holy Name Retreat or Sacred Sound Retreat. I also want to thank Premanjali and Nanta Kirtan for masterminding and organizing such a wonderful festival. Also, my thanks go to Narhari and Riti for their beautiful decorations, including marigolds and fairy lights and other things and tents. And I want to also thank Ajita for facilitating this grandiose event today. And also, before I delve into what I'm going to say today, I think it's important to remember that we shouldn't chant Hare Krishna and commit sinful activities and think that chanting Hare Krishna will absolve us from sinful activities. That's one of the offenses that we recite every morning. I think it's the seventh offense. It's considered the greatest offense of all. Once I attended a school just south of Los Angeles called Mary Mother of the Sea. It was a Catholic school. And after during the class, a number of the teachers, the nuns and the priests came in to see what we were all about. And then afterwards, one of the priests asked me if I wouldn't mind if I was with about 4 devotees, if we came to his chambers, because he wanted to talk with us. And then his discussion was, he said that he gives confessions regularly every Saturday night, but then the same people who come to confess come back the following Saturday, and it just goes on and on and on. He said, well, I want to know what your thought is about priyashchita, about absolving one's sinful activities on the strength of confessing. So we told him as best we could what was said about priyashchita, about atonement, and he liked what we said. He was a Catholic, and we were Hare Krishnas, of course, dressed like Hare Krishnas and looked like Hare Krishnas. And then he gave us a sealed envelope to take with us when we left. We were with him for about 15 minutes. And on the way back north to Los Angeles, it's about a 1 hour drive. We thought, what was in that envelope anyway? So even though it was sealed, we opened it up, and there was a $50 note in it, which was a lot of money in those days. And we deduced that he gave this money to us out of his own pocket because he liked what we said. So I'm going to invite, can you make a little bit of an aisleway so that people who are coming late, there's quite a few of them, I won't have to step over you. You just make a little about 1.5 meters wide. Thank you very much. So I want to invite you and anyone watching or listening to take a walk with me down memory lane. I'm making today's class is being videotaped on invitation of Devi Shakti of New Vrindavan in India, and I'm going to send it to her in a couple of days, and she's going to send it all over the world. So this tape is really for those devotees in Krishna Balaram Temple and all over India and all over the world, actually. So that's basically what it is, and the request was that I speak about the early days of meeting Srila Prabhupada in the Bowery and 26 2nd Avenue. So the Bowery is a very seedy place. It's become kind of a slum because the word Bower, it means a place of flowers, I think. It's mentioned in Srila Prabhupada's teachings. And then the Bowery has degenerated into a kind of a slum, and it's full of flop houses and alcoholics and people dying on the streets almost regularly. So that's where it all began. It all began when I was on a crosstown bus in Lower Manhattan called the Grand Street Bus. And on the weekends, I was a musician, so I had a job. I was playing in a nightclub in Staten Island, and we took a ferry to go there. And one of the band members was a guy named Mikey. I mean, I'm sort of fudging on the actual names of people because I want to avoid litigation. And I think Satsarupa's even doing this 50 years ago. And he named the person who was Prabhupada's roommate as somebody other than his real name. So I'm doing a little bit of that. I'm also giving some real names, but I'm using a lot of invented names just to avoid lawsuits and litigation. So this guy named Mikey, it's a very short run on this Grand Street bus, about 5 or 10 blocks. And he kind of knew that I was searching for something, and he didn't know what it was. But as we reached the end of our journey, he wrote on a scrap of paper with a half-chewed pencil and gave the address where Prabhupada was lecturing on the Bowery. And it was just up the road from where I was staying. I had this loft in the Bowery, and it was $55 per month, 55 American dollars per month, was very cheap. Although it sounds like a lot of money, it was very inexpensive. And Prabhupada was just living up the road, up the street in the same block, I think it was 94 or 95 Bowery, and I was at 110 Bowery. So he wrote down this address, and I thought, well, you know, I would be interested to go there and see what he's all about. And he said, this is a lecture by an old Indian man. He didn't say his name or anything much more, but I took this to be very interesting. And earlier on that year, this was in late 1966, probably about May or April, something like that. I had been to a place called the First Zen Institute in Lower Manhattan, and it was in a brownstone house, an Upper West Side, and I sat there in folding chairs with about half a dozen or a dozen other people. They were all older than I was. I was 24 years old, and they were in their 30s, and some were older. And then a man came from the back in a black robe, and he was a Buddhist monk of some kind. And he gave a talk, and he gave us some sheets of paper that had some mantras written on it. They were a kind of monotones, do, ro, mo, like this. And I tried to follow it, and it was fairly easy to follow. But anyway, I was not very impressed with his short speech. It was about 50 minutes long, and then he just kind of got up and disappeared out the back. And that was the end of that. And right before he was lecturing, there was a table right before him with some white tablecloth and some fruits in it. There were bananas and pomegranates and papayas and so on. But no one was eating. And then he just disappeared. And then all the participants invited me to come with them into another room in part of the flat to discuss what he'd said. And the discussion centered around, of all things, fasting. And the thing that I remembered the most was that they said you shouldn't break a fast with orange juice because it has acid in it. And I was just very disheartened to have gone to the First Zen Institute and found not what I was looking for, but found something very uninteresting. On another occasion, I went up a few blocks north, and there was another person lecturing. He was from India, an elderly person, maybe 45 or 50 or 60 years old, and he had a kind of squeaky voice. And he only talked for about 15 or 20 minutes, and I was also very unimpressed with what he said. And then a little earlier, I had gone to a big church in Manhattan. I think it was on Amsterdam Street. Big, huge church, about 5 times the size of this building, bigger than that maybe. And I waited and waited for the priest to come down and see what I had to say or what I wanted to ask. Finally, he came on board, came up to me, and he was wearing a trench coat and had a suit and tie on, and he said, "Can I help you?" And yes, I told him that I was searching for God, and then he looked at me, and then he said, "Well, I met someone some time ago named Mother Vivian." I didn't know who he was talking about, and he said that she had very lucid eyes, and that was the end of that. And he said, "I have an appointment to go to. I hope you don't mind, but I have to excuse myself." And so that whole meeting took about maybe 15 minutes, and again, I was very unimpressed. So I thought, well, I'll just take this note from Mikey and go to that address and see what this older Indian Swami has to say, because if he's in the Bowery, which is a very kind of seedy, slummy place, it might just be the real thing. Who knows? So I went there, and the first thing I noticed on the stoop, it was on the 4th floor of 94 Bowery. He wrote that on the note, 94 Bowery, 4th floor. There were 2 people sitting on the stoop, and they didn't want to let me past. They were both alcoholics, I think. And finally, I pushed my way through, and there's a little light coming up through the transom at the top of the doorway. And I went up the 4 flights of stairs, and at the top of the stairs, there was a door that was partly open, and I could hear this sound of the kartals going ching, 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 and I didn't know what I was getting into. And I opened the door, and at the street end of the loft was Swamiji. We called him Swamiji then. He was sitting on a raised wooden platform, and he had dark glasses. I don't know whether they were sunglasses or regular glasses, but they were in, we call them horn-rimmed glasses. They were reddish colored. And he was lecturing, and a few people were sitting around, about 7 or 8 people, mostly alternative people. I knew a few of them, but I didn't have any I didn't know them very well. And then I sat down, and they were chanting this mantra, Hare Krishna. And I didn't know what Krishna was or what Hare was. I just tried to sing along with them as best I could. And it was pretty difficult because I didn't know the words. So then Prabhupada spoke, and I thought he was just going to disappear out, somewhere in that building, like the Buddhist monk had done. But he just sat there, and he said, "Are there any questions?" And he was reading from a large book, which later on I found out was probably in the Srimad Bhagavatam or something. It was all in Sanskrit. And I violated one of the conventions of Hindu interaction, and I stood as he was sitting, and I stood, and my face was higher than him, and that is kind of a faux pas in etiquette, because when you speak to a person who you think is more elevated than you are, you're supposed to be in a lower position. But I was in a higher position. And then everything that I had to say started to evaporate. I didn't know what to say. And I had asked him a question earlier. The question was, if you saw a fight going on between an old man and a young man, would you intervene or would you just walk on? Because he was talking about very esoteric phenomena. I didn't know what to say. And then he kind of gave an answer. It was indirect. He said, you have to be on the spiritual platform before you could know what to do. And I had no idea what the spiritual platform was. So then I countered by saying, you didn't exactly answer my question. And I said, would you interfere or wouldn't you not interfere? And he said, yes, you would interfere. And then I thought I was satisfied. So to get back to my initial encounter with Prabhupada on a one-to-one basis, everything I was planning to say to him kind of evaporated as I stood in front of him. And the only thing I could think of saying, I had this Indian instrument in my house, a tambura, that drone instrument you may be familiar with. It looks kind of like a sitar. And I said, I have a tambura. And immediately he gestured this kind of way and said, then bring it. So I thought, okay, there's nothing more to say, nothing more to do, and and he just sat there, and I left. And I thought, well, I'll come next time, because he was lecturing 3 nights a week, and I'll bring my tambura and see what's happening. So I came back a few nights later with my tambura, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, and I was playing my tambura, and I was trying to figure out what scale he was chanting in, and the whole thing was very mysterious. And I just sat there, and then finally he started lecturing, and a few people listened. To us out of his own someone a year ago. And then if you see my initial and I saw a little light coming, what's happening? So I came back a few nights later with my tambura, and he was chanting Hare Krishna, and I was playing my tambura, and I was trying to figure out what scale he was chanting in, and the whole thing was very mysterious. And I just sat there, and then finally he started lecturing, and a few people listened. And he didn't know what I didn't know what to do. So I left. And then one day I came, about 3 or 4 days later, I came to the same, it was during the daytime. I came to the same place, and I found the 2 drunks were also sitting on. This time they weren't so belligerent. And I saw a little light coming through the transom. And this time I knew what to do. But the door was kind of locked, and I didn't know what to do. So I started doing what New Yorkers do when they're locked out. I started throwing coins up to the 4th story. It was a window, and I was hoping that the guy who lived with Prabhupada would come to open the door up and come out or something. And then suddenly Prabhupada himself stuck his head out. He lifted up the window and he stuck his head out and raised his index finger as if to say, I'll be right down. And I thought, oh my God, how's this holy man going to come down 4 flights of stairs and go all the way back up? But anyway, it happened. And he opened the door for me. And then I was trying to apologize. I said, well, I didn't mean for you to come all the way down here. And then he started climbing back up the stairs, and he said, follow me. And he was taking the stairs 2 at a time, just like someone that was my age. I couldn't believe that he was doing it so quickly. And then he walked to the other end where he was lecturing, and I sat down in front of him. And there was a big stack of manuscript papers about 30 centimeters high, and an old typewriter, Underwood typewriter, hand typewriter. And I asked him what these papers were and what this typewriter was, and he told me that he was translating from Sanskrit the Srimad Bhagavatam. I had no idea what the Srimad Bhagavatam was. And so I started to, it was a very amiable conversation, and and he started to ask me, so, well, what do you do? And I told him that I was a musician. And he said, well, what instrument do you play? And I said, well, I play the piano. And he said, oh, I can teach you how to play the piano for Krishna. And I thought, play the piano for Krishna? How's that possible? I mean, I could understand flute playing for Krishna, but piano playing for Krishna seemed ridiculous. So I changed the subject. And then I had a photograph, a black and white photograph of someone I knew named Surya, who was from Madras, Surya Kumari, and there was a picture of her walking with Jawaharlal Nehru. And I thought, well, Nehru was a great person, so maybe I'll just show Prabhupada this picture, or Swamiji this picture, and he'll say something. So I showed him the picture, and he started to tell me about Nehru, and he said that Nehru was trained in England to be a lawyer, a barrister. And he was, I don't know if he used the word rascal, but he just inveighed very heavily against Nehru. And then I switched conversations and I started talking about Gandhi. And then he said this similar thing about Gandhi, how Gandhi was a rascal, how the British just patted him on the back and they could live with his passive resistance. It was somebody else who I think it was Subhash Chandra Bose, who formed the Indian National Army. And he got Gurkhas, who were the captured fighters by the Germans who were fighting against India at that time. And he got them to come back to India. And he formed the Indian National Army. And he also got Gurkhas back from Japan, who were at that time siding with Germany in World War II. And then he started saying that Gandhi was just, not a great person, even though he was a follower of Gandhi in his early years, and he told me that. But the whole thing was just kind of mysterious to me. So then I departed, and then I came back a few days later with my tambura and listened to him talk. And at this talk, he said, this Sunday we're going to have a love feast. And I was wondering, how could this sadhu use these words like love and feast? Because those are like alternative people's words, hippie words. And but he was determined, and he said, we're going to do it next Sunday, and he named the time, and it was in the early evening. It was still light outside because it was summertime. And then he manifested a completely different characteristic. And instead of being spiritual master, you sit across from him, and then when you feel that you've learned everything he has to say, you kill him, and you move his dead body aside, and you sit in his place. And then I began to think, this guy, he might be a bit dangerous, and maybe he's taking drugs or something. I didn't know what to think. So then I kind of deduced that Prabhupada wanted to stay in my place because he had all his belongings and he had abandoned his place in the Bowery. And I thought to myself, well, I don't want him to stay here because it's going to be very invasive. And I told Prabhupada, I said, you wouldn't want to stay here because there's a lot of noise, and I had drums and what do they call those things? A vibraphone and a stand-up bass. And I said, we're playing all hours of the night, and you wouldn't like this. So then Carl said, well, then he could stay with Dr. Mishra. So there was a guy named Dr. Mishra who Prabhupada stayed with for a while, and then Prabhupada stayed at Carl's place. Carl was living nearby where I was staying. Carl had been a Princeton graduate, and he studied philosophy. And so that's where Prabhupada ended up staying. And then, after a few days, I thought, well, we can't go around staying in lofts in the Bowery. We have to get him a proper place. So I went to the Village Voice, which was the local neighborhood newspaper. And I found out the first place where they distribute their papers during the day. It was a weekly newspaper, the Village Voice. And I looked down the advertising columns on the want ads, and then I saw that there was 26 Savanakan Avenue, a storefront for rent. So I found there was a phone number, and I phoned the person who answered, and I made an appointment with him to see this place. Just a few days later. So a few days later, I rode my bicycle up to 26 2nd Avenue, and then I noticed this man coming down the street the opposite, about a block away, and he was wearing blue denim pants, a yellow T-shirt. He had a round face. He was a little bit shorter than I was, and he had very close cropped hair, like a crew cut or something like that, a very short hair. And he had a ring of keys. This ring was of metal, about this big around, about 30 centimeters in diameter. And he had a bunch of keys, and the keys were jangling as he walked. And then as he got up to me, I noticed that Prabhupada and Carl were also coming up the road. And I said, oh, there they are now. And he said, well, when they get here, we'll go inside and negotiate and talk. So we went inside the 26 2nd Avenue, which had a sign up on top which said Matchless Gifts, and it was a completely empty room. It's about 3 times the size of this room, and there was nothing in there except a pewter wash basin at the back. So we all sat down, Prabhupada, Carl Jurgen, and this guy named Mr. Gardiner was his name. This is all written in my book, by the way, A Miracle on 2nd Avenue. If you're interested in seeing what I'm saying today in writing, you can get that book. They have it in the store, and I think it's on Amazon. But I decided to make this video at the request of devotees in India because it's more present than a book, than a written doctrine. It's got there's some body language involved, facial expressions, and all that sort of thing, and other things. So I'm telling what actually happened, and then we all sat down, and there was a little ledge inside the 26 2nd Avenue. And Prabhupada started talking, and the man started talking. He said, well, what do you want to do with this place? And we said, well, he said, I also have an apartment available. It's in the same building. It's 1 floor up, and we can have a look at it if you're interested. The loft was going to, the room, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, or the Matchless Gifts place was going to cost $100 per month, which was a very low price. And then I heard Prabhupada look at me and Carl and said you, and then he looked at Mr. Gardner. He said, you could become a subscriber member like Mr. Michael and Mr. Carl. He used to call us Mr. and our first name was appended afterwards. And I had never heard of a subscription or a member or anything like that. And he can somehow or other convince this man to become a subscriber member at whatever it was, $19 a month or something. And he was and Prabhupada had the books that he came with. There were Bhagavatam, first canto, all 3 volumes, and he gave him the books. And this man was looking through the books, and then he kind of leafed through them, and he was looking at Prabhupada, and he said, well, thank you very much. And he said, yeah, maybe I'll just become a member. And well, let's go up and have a look at the apartment. And he said, I can give you that for $85 a month. And we went up and walked to the back of the storefront and walked through the little courtyard and up the 1 flight of stairs and looked at the apartment. It was also very empty, but very clean and nice. And then we all walked down and sat down on the ledge, the same ledge. And Prabhupada and the Mr. Gardner said that he said, you have to give me a week because I want to paint this. I want to paint the apartment and tidy up this place. So we waited a whole week, and then a week later, Prabhupada officially moved out and there was and I was he was carrying 2 suitcases. This was probably in the end of May 1966, and there was a long line of people, about 7 or 8 people following, and it was a long line. I call it the safari in the concrete jungle. It was from where we were in the Bowery to 26 2nd Avenue was about a 10-block journey, and we were all on foot. And I was thinking, why didn't we get a car or a truck or something? This is a long walk. And I was really feeling for Prabhupada, an elderly person in his 60s or 70s, carrying 2 suitcases, and it was a very warm morning, hot day, and walking up the street, but he didn't. There was no complaint. And I was carrying a tape recorder. In those days, it was a Roberts reel-to-reel tape recorder, very heavy, big instrument. And I carried it on, and the reels were about 30 centimeters in diameter, and it had 2 of them, and it was recording everything that was being said at the Bowery. And I was carrying this on one shoulder, and it got so heavy that I switched shoulders and started carrying it on the other one. And by the time we got to 26 2nd Avenue, I was totally sore on both shoulders. Anyway, Prabhupada liked this arrangement, and it was on the because it was on the ground floor. At least the Matchless Gifts place was on the ground floor, and he liked his apartment. And so he started lecturing 3 times a week, and he put a signboard on the front that you could see from the plate glass window in front that said International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And some people that were coming along thought that was, pretty interesting. International Society for Krishna Consciousness, little storefront in South Manhattan, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. It didn't make much sense. It said lectures 3 nights a week on Bhagavad Gita, Monday and Wednesday and Friday at 7 p.m. So Prabhupada started lecturing there. And when he was lecturing, a few people started to come, and then a few more people started to come. And as it progressed into June and July, more people started to come. And then one day, as I was sitting down along with other people in the 26 2nd Avenue, I found myself sitting next to Allen Ginsberg, who at that time was something of a celebrity. He was, at least in the alternative world, he was a bit of a celebrity. That was his real name, Allen Ginsberg. And then Prabhupada announced that day that he was going back to India. And we thought, how can he go back to India? I thought, it's just the beginning of something. And how is he leaving us just all alone? And what I found out later is that he had been down to the tip of Manhattan where the boats arrive and depart, and he had found out when the next boats were leaving for India. But then he decided on his own that he would stay a bit longer, that he wouldn't go back right away. And then after he said this, we had a little powwow, a little parley amongst ourselves to say what we could do to keep him here. And we said, well, Allen Ginsberg was part of the discussion, and we said, and Brahmananda was trying to raise money, and because it was going to cost us to get a lawyer, and then to do the immigration thing was going to cost money. And Allen Ginsberg said, well, I'll contribute money. I'll contribute $100 towards this. I'll get a lawyer, and I know some people that are in the U.S. Senate who are cooperative. And if I tell them what you want to do, they can arrange everything. So then we didn't know what to think. And then he thought, well, here's a celebrity who wants to help us. And a few nights earlier, Prabhupada had been asked by a lawyer that he found. The lawyer asked him, he said, if your movement is so good and Krishna is so kind, why is he sending so many people to Vietnam to fight in the war? And then Prabhupada didn't answer immediately. He just kind of looked at him, and then he said, pointing his finger out, he said, you are killing so many animals, so God is saying, send your sons to the slaughterhouse. And that was the end of that conversation. And I thought it was a good answer, but I didn't know what to think. I thought, well, karma is a very strange phenomenon. Karma and the transmigration of the soul. He was talking about in the very beginning transmigration, just like we all believed in it. We didn't even know what it was. We had sort of heard that there was an alternative book out about the afterlife and about reincarnation, but nobody took it seriously, although it was said that 20% of Americans believed it was a possibility, that reincarnation or transmigration of the soul was a possibility. So in the days that followed, Brahmananda, the late Brahmananda, and devotees were trying to raise more money because we thought $100 isn't going to be enough. And the late Brahmananda was asking people to give him money. He said, "Our father is in difficulty, and we want some money." And so he raised some money. I don't know how much, but he raised some money. And then Prabhupada and then he decided that then he found out that Allen Ginsberg had contacted a congressman and that his visa was going to be extended, and that he decided that he would stay. So one day, while he was lecturing, this was getting to be dusk. It was about 7 o'clock at night. And a man kind of staggered in, and we thought, "Oh God, what's he doing? He's drunk." And he had disheveled hair, and he had baggy pants, and he was walking towards Prabhupada. And then he was reaching into his overcoat, which didn't fit him. And we thought, what's he going to pull out, a gun or a knife, or what's he going to do? And then what he pulled out was a roll of toilet paper, a new roll of toilet paper. And he plunked it down on Prabhupada's lectern, and then he backed off and started to walk backwards. And he got about halfway back, and he sort of collapsed. I don't know what happened. He was turning, and then as the kirtan got a little bit more lively, he stood up and he started spinning around, and then he collapsed again. And then a few days later, the same man came to this place, and this time he was well dressed. He had a suit and tie on. His hair was combed. He wasn't wearing baggy pants, and his overcoat seemed to fit him. And he sat down and listened. And Prabhupada had looked at him, and he had said, "Just see how powerful the holy name is. This man came and he was completely out of order, and now he's in order." Something like that. So that was the beginning of 26 Second Avenue. And Prabhupada started his morning walks on something that Brahmananda said. Prabhupada was very ill at 26 Second Avenue, and he was admitted to hospital. He was so ill, and then he came back and was pronounced cured. And the late Brahmananda thought to get a doctor to examine him to see what was actually wrong with him. And they went into he examined Prabhupada, and then Brahmananda and this man, the doctor, who was he himself was a little disheveled and drunk or something, not in order. But anyway, they had a conference. And Prabhupada overheard what they were saying. He wasn't in the same room, but he overheard what they were saying. And what the man told the late Brahmananda was that he said he prays too much. The old man prays too much. He has to get out and get some fresh air. He has to go for a walk. And ever since that time, Prabhupada took his morning walks. And years later, when they were in Switzerland, up in the Alps in a place called St. Moritz, which is a kind of touristy town, and it snows very heavily up there. And sometimes the snow drifts are 1 or 2 meters deep. Prabhupada was walking up and down the hotel corridor. That was his morning walk, because he wouldn't go outside in the freezing cold. He was going for his walk. And that was the beginning of the morning walks. So that's what happened at the Bowery, and partly what happened at 26 Second Avenue, what became 26 Second Avenue. And that's the whole story of the early days of the Bowery and 26 Second Avenue. So if anyone has anything to say or anything to ask, I'll try to answer. Yes?
You mentioned also at what point was
just know that this is going to be seen and heard all over the world, whatever you say.
Now, you didn't mention the incorporation of ISKCON. At what point did that happen, and what put that on?
I think that happened in July of 1966, and Prabhupada penned the 7 principles of ISKCON because he had a kind of legal mind, even though he was a sadhu. He had a very strong streak in him about legalities. And so he got a lawyer named Alan Goldsmith to go up to the New York registration office and got it officially registered. And I think it was in July of 1966. And it was officially the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And then at some point earlier on, Prabhupada said, what are we going to call this organization? And then one of the devotees said, well, we should call it God Consciousness, the International Society for God Consciousness, because they were thinking, and I was thinking, that this is a better name than calling it Society for Krishna Consciousness, because no one knows who Krishna is. It's just a foreign word. But Prabhupada and said, I like Krishna Consciousness better. So that became the name, and that became the incorporation name, International Society for Krishna Consciousness. That became registered then. And then I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but when Prabhupada came to England in a little bit later than that, he wanted us to use the same 7 principles to incorporate in that country that were already incorporated in New York. So that was the second country that had the International Society for Krishna Consciousness in it. Yes?
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Can you remember actually getting to the point where you asked Prabhupada like a deep question, when you sort of figured that...
I didn't really ever ask Prabhupada deep questions because I just wanted to listen. I wanted to listen, so I didn't ask much. And then years later, another thing I wanted to mention is that he announced one day, this was probably in June, he was at 26th Avenue, he announced that today is Janmashtami and we're going to fast today until midnight. And I thought, my God, I can't possibly fast for 18 hours. And then I told one of the devotees that was sitting next to me, and then he said, if you can't fast for 18 hours, you can at least have some sugar candy. That's what they call in India, it's in America they call it rock candy. It's kind of a clear crystal sugar, crystallized. So this devotee came back and he said, well, I couldn't find any sugar candy or rock candy, but I did get some candy, and I got a package of these. And he showed me a package of Lifesavers, which is a candy. And he said, well, this is sugar and it's candy, so maybe we should just go with that. And so when Prabhupada was not noticing me, I would slip a Lifesaver into my mouth, and the guy sitting next to me did the same thing, so he wouldn't know we were breaking the fast. Then a couple of years later, when we were in Montreal, Canada, Prabhupada was asking everyone, not everyone, but about 6 people to give their rendition, or why they were Krishna conscious. And I was very nervous. I was scrawling words down on a piece of paper, getting ready to say what I wanted to say. But anyway, it all happened that way. Any other comments or questions?
Can you remember any of Prabhupada's early, like he used to advise us, we're not these bodies, things like that? Can you remember?
The thing I remembered the most of what he said was, I'm not this body. And I thought, well, maybe he thinks he's not his body, but I'm not thinking that I am not my body. But I remember that phrase over and over again. He said it, I am not this body. And even though most of the people there didn't know what transmigration of the soul was, they kind of thought it might be possible. And even what he said was very memorable. I am not this body. That was the first deep philosophical thing that I learned. One thing I wanted to mention was that I asked Prabhupada if we could have a Sanskrit class, because I was interested in languages. And somehow or other, he got an old blackboard. I think he probably got it in a garbage can on the corner. They were overflowing with garbage on the corner of Grand Street and Bowery. And early Saturday morning, he had a Sanskrit class, and the first thing he wrote was a verse from the Brahma Samhita, Ishvara Parama Krishna Sachidananda Vigraha. That was the first verse I learned. And I memorized it. And then after a while, I used to come to Prabhupada, and then he saw in the newspaper that I had been arrested. Had been accused of statutory rape, contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and possessing narcotics with the intent to sell. And what had happened was that I had gone to a place in upstate New York called Hurleyville. And a friend of mine, parents owned this block of apartments, and his 16-year-old girlfriend was fast asleep in the other room. I didn't even know that she was there, and I had an apartment next door. And I went into, but there was no water coming out, so I went next door where I was staying to get water, where he was staying, and then I saw police cars drive up. And they had their sirens on and flashing red lights, and I thought, well, I don't want to be part of this whole thing. And they came up to the door where I was, and they came in, barged right in, and said, "You're coming with us." And they had a search warrant, and they had this guy's name on it. And I said, "Well, that's not me." And I said, "You're in the wrong place." And they said, "Well, you're here and you knew about it, so you're coming with us." And then they started searching all over the apartment for marijuana or any kind of drugs, and they couldn't find anything. And then they looked in the sink, they looked behind the toilet bowl, and they looked. They finally went into the room where Harvey's girlfriend was sound asleep, and then I heard a voice from the other room say, "Look what Daddy found." He was one of the policemen, and he came out with a little cellophane package of marijuana. And then they somehow or other they found this guy who was the perpetrator who was selling marijuana, and he was in the police car, and he looked very dejected. And then they made me go into the same car with him, with a state trooper from New York, and that was a part of the police. And I said, well, I said, why are you arresting me? And he said the search warrant didn't even have my name on it. And the guy turned to me, who was driving the car, the state trooper. He said, "I don't talk to idiots." And that was that. And the car smelled like the inside of a hospital. It was clean, full of coverings on the seats. And then they went to the police station and they started to take mugshots of all the people that they'd arrested. Harvey, his girlfriend, and myself. And when I made a protest, they just kicked me. And, it was not violent. I wasn't bruised or anything, didn't cause any blood, and then I was put in prison. And I stayed in that prison for about 3 or 4 days, and there was nothing in there except old Western books, Zane Grey novels. And so I stayed in there, and I had become a committed vegetarian at that time. And so I didn't eat everything they brought were hot dogs, meat and white bread, and I wouldn't eat anything. And after about 3 days, I succumbed, and I took a piece of the white bread and I crushed it into a little piece of about the size of a dice, and I just started to eat that. But I wouldn't eat the meat, which I put in the toilet. It was just a little room, about 1/3 the size of this room, with a toilet and bars across the front. And then I phoned some relatives, or I somehow was able to communicate with a relative of mine that gave some bail money so I could get out. And it was a very difficult, but after 5 days I got out, and a friend of mine contacted a lawyer who had been a judge in the borough of Brooklyn. And this judge came by my place and collected me one day, and I had to go to a court hearing. And he said, whatever you do, don't say that you ever smoke marijuana, even as an experiment. Just say, if the judge asks you, just say no. So when I went into the courtroom, it was about an hour and a half or 3 hours away. The presiding judge stood up and he addressed the judge the lawyer that I came with, because he knew him. And he said, "Oh, Judge Forbes," he said, "glad to see you," or something like that. And then they went into the back room. So the whole thing was decided congenially between the presiding judge and my lawyer, and they had dismissed my case. And so when they came back, the presiding judge said, Michael Grant, that was the name that I officially had, versus New York State, case dismissed. And then I thought, well, it's over. And then he said, and then I looked to the lawyer and he said, "Don't worry," he said, "you can go now." And they drove me back, and that was the end of that. So shortly after that, I told Prabhupada that I was going to India. I was going to learn how to play the Indian flute, and a friend of mine had gone and stayed in a little flat, and he said, "This is a terrible place, but if you want to come, go ahead." So I decided to send him $25. And I went to American Express, and I got an American Express draft for $25, and I mailed it to him. but he never got it. And I found out later that someone in the Postal Service had stolen the money. But American Express made good on it. They gave me the $25 back. So that was the beginning of my, and then I told Prabhupada that I was going to the West Coast. That was New York was where I was. That was on the East Coast of the United States. And I was about to say goodbye. And when I asked him, I said, "Do you know anyone in India that I can contact?" And then he kind of thought for a while, and he gave me this name of a guy, and he wrote down his address, and I looked at the address, and there was some information I didn't understand, and he said there's a slash mark or stroke. He called it a stroke, and I said, "What is stroke?" And he said that, and I said, "Oh, so you mean slash?" And then he said, "Yes." And then I turned to leave, and as I was walking out the door of the flat, he said, "When you're in the West Coast, just see if you can start a center for Krishna consciousness." And I thought, he's daydreaming. I mean, I'm not a member, and I'm not going to start anything. So on the way to California, I stopped and met some old friends of mine that were they were working for the United States Park Service. And the job that this man had, his name, we'll call him Dustin, he went up to a tower. There was a little house on top of a tower where he would look out for forest fires. That was his job, to spot forest fires and then notify the Parks Commission of any possible danger that was coming ahead. And then he went back down, and he looked at me and my wife, and he said, "You guys seem to be really different. Why is that? What are you doing that's different?" And we told him all about the Swami and the Bowery, and they were very impressed. And they said, "Well, why don't you go down to Los Angeles like you were going to, or San Francisco, and we'll just meet you there." And then when I got to San Francisco, I thought, okay, I'm going to try it. And I turned in my tickets to India, got a refund, and then that was the beginning of the first temple. And then I went to 518 Frederick Street and saw this big sign for rent, and then I managed to rent that place. It was $125 per month, and I rented the place, and then Prabhupada came there. And that was the first time he'd been in an airplane, maybe ever. And he came. And that was the beginning of Hare Krishna in San Francisco. One thing that happened, I'll go back a little bit. After he got that place in San Francisco, a man was screaming Hare Krishna. This was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was up on the 4th floor, and Prabhupada was on the 4th floor. And then I just thought, this is insane. And at about 4 o'clock, because the door was locked, and he couldn't get in. Finally, they let him in. I guess they sat down and had a kirtan with him, and he kind of calmed down. So about 6 o'clock, I went into the temple, and I saw this guy, and a police car drove up and tossed him. They wouldn't come in. They opened the door a little ways, and they tossed him a wallet, and they said, "Hey, Mike," that was his name, Mike, "you left your wallet in our car." And the police station was just around the corner from 518 Frederick Street, where the temple was. And they just knew that we could do what they couldn't do at the hospital. They had taken him to the hospital, and they said, "We can't do anything. He's gone completely mad." And then when he started chanting Hare Krishna, he calmed way down. By the time I got there, he was just sitting there chanting. And then a little later, on January, I think I don't remember the exact date, but Prabhupada, we had the mantra rock dance in the Avalon Ballroom. The Avalon Ballroom was one of the places where groups like the Grateful Dead and Moby Grape and Quicksilver Messenger Company used to have their debuts. So we rented this hall, and it was on a Sunday night, and we thought, oh, nobody's going to come on Sunday night. They'll come on a Saturday night and a Friday night, but on a Sunday night, nobody's going to come. But they did come, and we contacted Allen Ginsberg on the East Coast of New York to be part of this. So a sign was made up that said Mantra Rock Dance, and it had the names Allen Ginsberg and the names of all the rock groups, Grateful Dead, and so on and so forth. And Prabhupada went there. It was a nighttime function. And the main speaker was Allen Ginsberg. So he spoke for about 15 minutes, and he kind of knew about this incident, about the guy who went mad and got calmed down. And he was using space technology jargon. He said, if you're having a bad trip, then you can stabilize yourself on re-entry. That's the word he used. The wording he used, stabilize yourself on re-entry. by coming to the Hare Krishna temple. And so that more and more people started to come to the Hare Krishna temple at 518 Frederick Street. Hare Krishna. Any other comments or questions? So this is mostly, everything I've said is mostly in my book, Miracle on 2nd Avenue, and I think you can get that book on Amazon or in the temple shop if you want it. But this is a little more present because it involves video. And the tone is a little different, and there's facial gestures, and there's a little body language and that sort of thing. Hare Krishna. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Anyone?
Maharaj, could you just say a little bit about being the first devotee in ISKCON to be personally taught how to play the mridanga by Srila Prabhupada?
I don't know who was the first person who was taught to play the mridanga by Prabhupada, but he did teach me the basic beats, gita ta, gita ta, gita ta, gita, and how to hold it, where to play it, and so on and so forth.
Okay, thank you for that. Was that in New York or San Francisco?
That was in San Francisco.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? Questions or comments? Thank you very much.